In our last episode, Russia began to mobilize. Austria's limited war against Serbia was no longer limited. What Vienna had feared for decades, a general war, a Russian war, was now at hand. Franz Josef had outlived everything but his empire, and now even that was slipping. This is road to destruction, the world wars. The war Austria wanted was never meant to be grand or global. It was supposed to be brief, punitive, a final blow against a defiant neighbor, and a message to the restless peoples inside the empire's own borders. But the world didn't cooperate. The ultimatum to Serbia had been Austria's first move. War followed days later, but the rest, Russia, Germany, France, Britain, was never part of the plan. Vienna believed the world would blink. It didn't, because Austria's crisis was never just Austria's, not anymore. Russia's mobilization came first, partial at first, then full. It was a move Austria had hoped to avoid, and one it had made almost no preparations for. The eastern frontier was undefended. There was no war plan ready for Russia, only Serbia, and now the empire faced both. In Berlin, the German High Command saw Russia's mobilization not as a warning but a countdown. Germany's Schlieffen Plan, its strategy for fighting a two-front war, required a rapid strike west before Russia could gather strength in the east. So when Russia moved, Germany followed. On August 1st, Germany declared war on Russia. On August 3rd, Germany declared war on France. And on August 4th, Britain declared war on Germany after its armies violated Belgian neutrality. The dominoes had fallen, and the fuse Austria lit in Sarajevo had reached the powder. The war was now continental. Austria, the empire that had spent a month hesitating, had become a participant in the greatest conflagration Europe had ever seen. But for Franz Josef, this wasn't a misstep. It was destiny, and in his eyes, the only way to halt the slow death of a 600-year-old Habsburg empire. He had ruled for 66 years, longer than any other monarch in Europe, longer than any living Austrian had known peace without him. He had endured revolution, lost his brother in Mexico, his wife to an assassin, his son to suicide, and his heir to a bullet in Sarajevo. He had led his empire through defeats at Solferino and Königgrätz, through humiliation in Italy and Germany, through the slow fracture of compromise with Hungary and the rising nationalism of Slavs, Croats, Czechs and Serbs, and through it all, he endured. The empire no longer resembled the one he inherited. It was smaller, weaker, more divided, but it still existed, and in Franz Josef's eyes that alone was proof of its worth. So when the final crisis came, when the last heir fell, when the last insult landed, Franz Josef did not flinch. He struck back, not out of bloodlust, not even out of vengeance, but because he believed it was his duty, to the dynasty, to the empire, and perhaps to give meaning to everything that had come before. He did not doubt. He did not apologize. He believed in the necessity of the strike. Franz Josef was not swept along by war. He gave himself to it, quietly, resolutely. There would be no more compromises, no more archdukes to send, no more heirs to bury. He would lead his empire into this war, not to save it, but to justify its long decline. And so Austria prepared to fight. On August 6, 1914, it declared war on Russia. Its armies were already marching toward Serbia. Its officers were sharpening plans against Italy. Ambassadors hugged and cried in the street, and its diplomats finally were silent. The empire had made its final bet. It believed that with Germany beside it, victory was still possible, that the Slavs inside and outside its borders could be silenced, that the monarchy could still impose order on a world slipping into chaos. But none of those things were true. Austria-Hungary was entering a war it could not control and would not survive. Franz Josef would not live to see its end, but this war, more than any other moment in his long reign, would define him. It was not his greatest mistake. It was his last act of faith, a final attempt to hold together what time, revolution, and failure had already begun to break apart. He did not rage against the war. He welcomed it. This is where we leave Franz Josef, not in glory, not in failure, but in motion. An emperor who had outlived revolutions, defeats, assassinations, and the slow unraveling of everything he was born to rule. He did not go to war out of madness or ambition, but out of belief that the empire could still be saved, that order could still be restored, that the legacy of the Habsburgs was worth one final stand. But in striking Serbia, he struck the match, and the fire that followed would not be kind to old men or old empires. He would never see the fall, but he helped set it in motion. This was his last act, not as a ruler of peace, but as the reluctant spark in a war of empires. And in the end, that is how history would remember him. A monarch from another age, swept into the abyss by the very traditions he tried to preserve. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the twilight of Franz Josef's empire. Next, we turn east, to the Ottoman Empire, to sultans and reformers, rebels and autocrats, all struggling to hold together a world that was slipping through their fingers. Not a story of sudden collapse, but of slow-motion decay, of the rulers, and even more so the people who tried and failed to stop it. This is Road to Destruction, the World Wars.